Offensive linemen, some tackles in the house tonight. I've got Andrew Mertins with me. Boys and girls, let's hit it.
I love gold.
I love gold indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Gold Zone. I am the only Jacob tonight, which is fine. I am the far more handsome and insightful one of the two of us. I can safely say that. I'm your host. I'm Jacob Westendorf. Jake Morley is not with us. He had a tragic trip to Arizona and heartbreaking. He has to avoid the snow and the weather and all that stuff and soak up some sun. So he's doing that while the Packers are theoretically doing some stuff in free agency. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. I am joined by member of Game On Wisconsin, offensive tackle writer, video editor. We don't really have set titles here just yet.
Yeah, just kind of loosey-goosey. Just kind of
jack of all trades, Andrew Mertins. You can follow him on Twitter. He's at Mertins_Andrew. Andrew, how you feeling? This is your first appearance on the Gold Zone.
Yeah, feeling pretty good. I'm glad to be on. And I know we were just talking before the show. You know, I was like, I saw where my draft order was of us picking positions, and I was like, there's going to be linemen left, but honestly, I think it works out well. It's a position that I think a lot of people argue is something the Packers need or definitely should get, and there's plenty who look like they either are NFL ready or they're very close. So
yeah, that's a good start. And the Packers are going to need, depending on, who you talk to and the state of the Packers offensive line, which we will get into here in just a little bit, exactly what the Packers need. Like I mentioned, this is the Gold Zone. We are live here in the Game On Wisconsin studios. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at Game On WI, find us on Instagram at Game On WI, and subscribe on YouTube, Game On Wisconsin. Hit that little bell in the top right corner so you don't miss anything that we are doing here in the next several weeks and months and years to come, because we're going to be here for quite some time. Andrew, I want to start though. It is the week of free agency. The new league year did begin today. So everybody, happy new NFL league year and happy St. Patrick's Day to all of you Irishmen out here. I'm sure you can all put me to shame when it comes to drinking, but that's because, well, I don't drink. So that's not saying too much, I guess. But let's talk a little bit about some free agent wishes. And I know the Packers have done a lot of their heavy lifting in free agency already. They signed the best defensive tackle on the market. His name is Kenny Clark. They signed him back in August. They signed the best left tackle on the market. His name was David Bakhtiari. They signed him in November. And they signed the best running back on the market. His name is Aaron Jones, and they just signed him a couple of days ago. So let's start there. The Aaron Jones contract, polarizing, I guess, is the right word. The question is he a playmaker? Is he a weapon? Or is he a running back? And whether or not you should, in fact, pay a running back. So I want to hear, what are your thoughts on this signing?
It's surprising, definitely. I for sure didn't. I part of me, I thought they weren't going to sign either him or Lindsley. I thought they were both gone. So I guess in that sense, it's nice to have at least one of them. But also, I think a lot of people are hailing this as, why are you paying the running back top dollar? But it's not really top dollar looking at some of the other contracts still out there. I think he's only going to be making about roughly $9.5 million each year outside of the signing bonus. I know the first 2 years it said he was going to be making the bulk of the money. So I thought it wasn't really that bad of a deal once we started learning some more of the details. And he is a great playmaker. No question about it. He's excellent with receiving. He keeps the defense honest. I think that's what was my big thing of why I'm not upset that he's going, because he's so good in both the passing game and the running game, and I'm excited to see him and AJ Dillon in that backfield and seeing what they both can do.
Yeah, on the field, there isn't a better pairing skill set wise than Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon. It is the classic old age thunder and lightning type of combo, which everyone has talked about a bunch over the last several days since the Packers. Actually, honestly, since they drafted Dillon, that's been kind of the dream, the consideration of everything like that. The contract essentially is a 2-year deal and worth about what the franchise tag would have cost in back-to-back years. It's just not all fully guaranteed. So from that standpoint, a good thing. Me personally, I'm still kind of a proponent of don't pay running backs. So I can't be too thrilled, I guess, but I'm never going to be too upset when the Packers are able to keep a good player on their roster. And certainly Aaron Jones is a very good player. So they kept him and they were able to do it. This was my thing with the franchise tag. As I said, there are so many things that can happen if you tag him. You can anger him to where he holds out and it makes a distraction that is unnecessary as he holds out. You can make it a negotiation within the media throughout the entire season, which the Packers certainly wanted to avoid if they could. And as Peter Bukowski from Locked On Packers, friend of the program here, pointed out, you can alienate your locker room with the understanding of, hey, it does not matter what you do. If you play a certain position, we are going to treat you like an asset as opposed to a person, which the Packers have tried several times over the years. This is where the people that come to Green Bay, they say they understand one of the reasons they say it's special is they treat you like people in this business. Now, I understand business is business, and there's a business side to this NFL that's cruel and frankly a little disturbing, but that is the case. That being said, I think the Packers were able to do that without getting him alienated and making him angry over the next couple of years, and really alienating some of the people in the locker room because thinking, Jones, hey, what do I have to do? Rush for 2,000 yards for them to want to pay me, but then they don't use me enough. And you talk about him potentially. I'm not saying this is an Aaron Jones's character. We've never seen anything like this before, but the potential was there for him to spout off to the media for those sorts of things. One question we have in here is, do we think Aaron Jones will still be a factor if the offensive line takes a step down? And my answer to that question is absolutely. Aaron Jones, I will rest my case on this. Aaron Jones played behind Byron Bell. Byron Bell was a human turnstile when that happened. So and the Packers offensive line, if Bakhtiari can come back and be healthy, he will be very good. And the Packers offensive line will still be very good, even with the exit from Corey Linsley, depending on what they do. And we'll get to that in just a minute, but let's talk a little bit. Let's have some fun. Free agency officially began today. The legal tampering period started on Monday, and the Packers were talking to, according to Rob Domowski, mid-level corners and mid-level defensive linemen. There's some buzz about potentially wide receivers. There's buzz about offensive linemen and what they're going to do there. Andrew, if you could pick a ideal offseason in terms of, give me, let's say 2 names. And obviously Kenny Golladay is not going to be one of those names. That gentleman is going to sign for quite a bit of money and he's going to deserve every single bit of it. One name you can cross off that list is pointed out by my man, Jason. Patrick Peterson is a Minnesota Viking. That doesn't bother me all that much. He looks like somebody who has certainly lost a step or two. So that's not going to move. He wasn't going to move the needle that much for me as a Packer anyways. So if there was any hope he was coming to Green Bay, I wasn't all that thrilled with it. Obviously, we're going to talk ourselves into anything that this team does for the most part. That's just kind of the nature of this. But if you could give me 2 names as players that you could see coming to Green Bay, or if you don't want to be specific names, say positions, then who would you say the Packers should be looking at to bring in to improve this team? Because newsflash, guys, they're going to add something. They didn't move all this money to next year and do all this stuff to just stand pat and say, we've got the same team plus rookies. I firmly believe that's not going to be the case. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think so. But what do you think, Andrew?
Yeah. I'm not totally opposed. And I think it's just because, you look at some of the stats, even from last year, he's aging. If you really want to add corner, potentially Richard Sherman, again, age could be a factor. He still played well last season, and also you don't know how much he wants. I know there was something coming out about, He said he'd be willing to take a cut. Well, how big is that cut? He's not going to settle for super less. A guy before they had tendered Chandon was Desmond King. I know we were talking about that pre-show, but obviously that's off the table. He was a clear-cut slot corner who had some special teams aspects to bring in. He could be a punt returner, but again, that's off the table now that they've tendered Shannon Sullivan. Defensive line, I don't necessarily remember everyone who's still out there. I know someone who they had at least attempted to trade for last season, Dallin Tomlinson. Obviously, that's not an option, but offensively, I don't know. There's talks of receivers receivers on a prove it 1 year deal or a year where they play for 1 year and they play lights out to get a big contract.
Let me stop you there, because here's the thing, guys.
Yeah.
Prove it deals, because I see that all the time. Well, why wouldn't a receiver just want to come play with Aaron Rodgers and do that? Prove it deals are an absolute last resort, 100% of the time, because a player, all it takes is one play, one injury, and that guy's career is over. So Kenny Golladay, for example, that was a name I saw floating around today. Kenny Golladay already has injury history. So he really is just one injury left from being like, okay, generational wealth is gone. I'm going to make a nice living because I'm in the NFL, but that's just not how that works. And unfortunately, that's the case. Prove it deals are a last resort. It's when the people that take those prove it deals, like when BJ Raji took one ages ago, and that's when I'm convinced the phrase prove it deal started. There was not a market for him that he enjoyed. So his idea was to bet on himself, but that's a risky bet. And especially at a position like receiver where you're over the middle and these safeties. I mean, I know they've kind of taken some of that stuff out of the game, but they'll hit you. And all it takes is one shot to the knee, one shot to the leg, one shot to the head, and your career is never the same. So I'm sorry to say that, but
and that's kind of what I was saying with it was I'm hearing, someone go play with Aaron Rodgers and you light it up and you get a big deal. And that I'm like, I think I heard, people flirting with the Juju Smith-Schuster, just come to Green Bay and play lights out for a year then go get a big deal. But then, and I'm like, well, how do we know that's what would happen? And how, I just don't see it happening. I wouldn't see that be a thing. So that's why I think if they're going to do anything wide receiver, they're going to wait for the draft, but really, I think if they do anything free agency, I think it's got to be on the defensive side, particularly if there's a corner they're interested in or defensive lineman. I think that's obviously those are the kind of the needs. Some people would say linebacker, but again, we've seen time and time again the linebackers we had last year were just fine. I thought they weren't showstoppers by any means, but I thought for the most part they got the job done, and they got two younger guys who I would think they want to keep developing.
Yeah, my thought on that is I think that, and I don't know how realistic these things are. Russ Ball is the capologist, and I think if there's anything we've learned over the last 10 days or so, Russ Ball knows more than we do. And if they want to find a way to make that work, then they will. Brian Gutekunst said as much. The one thing that sticks out to me is Gutekunst saying, as far as a big free agent, if they needed to do it for the right player in the right situation, they could make it work. And that stuck with me. Now, what they could do is do that with one guy and put all those eggs into that one basket, or they could spread them over multiples. And I'm going to give you a couple situations on that side. A report today from Brad Biggs said that the Bears could part ways with Kyle Fuller. And some of you famously remember the Green Bay Packers signed Kyle Fuller to an offer sheet, 3 years ago now? The year they drafted Jair Alexander was the year they signed Kyle Fuller to an offer sheet. It was matched, obviously, in that time frame. But Fuller is somebody to me that he's a cornerback 1 in Chicago, but he's a cornerback 2 in Green Bay, and I think that would be a fantastic tandem with Jair Alexander. You want to talk about the big free agent that you can make that work? I think that's the guy that you make it work with if you can. Now, obviously, he hasn't been released as of yet. There's no concrete evidence to say that he will, but an interesting report, Brad Biggs is connected to the Bears in that way. So that could be interesting. If you're going to go the mid-level route, A lot of people are mentioning Jarrell Casey. I know Jason's in here talking about that. He's not the only one. BJ Raji, to my knowledge, is not available, but I would imagine that that's not going to be the case. As far as a question on Kyle Fuller's market value, I imagine that would be pretty significant, but I don't know. And it's hard to say what a contract is going to look like because we just never know. Crazy stuff happens every single year, and we just don't know what everything looks like. But I think that would be the sole signing of the offseason, as pointed out here. And I would be okay with that. If you can fill your biggest hole, which is the other cornerback opposite of Jair Alexander, and then figure out I know the defensive line class isn't great, and we'll get to that next week when we have Ben Fennell on, tease for next week. And we'll get through some of that stuff. And I understand that the Packers have other needs, but if that's the only signing, kudos, man, because you took your biggest weakness from a year ago. And honestly, not the sole reason, but the biggest reason you lost the NFC Championship game and filled it with a player who's still, it's not Patrick Peterson where he's 32 years old. It's not Richard Sherman where he's 32 years old and coming off an Achilles injury. It's a young player who's maybe not ascending, but that part is interesting nonetheless, if they can figure out a way to make it work. Now that's the other key question. If they go the mid-level route, my answer to cornerback since this whole thing started was Xavier Rhodes. And he played for Jerry Gray in Minnesota. He had his best years under Jerry Gray in Minnesota. He's the perfect type of guy that you sign for a year or two and let him develop, JC Horn, Greg Newsome, whoever your cornerbacks are that you end up drafting in this year's class. And then also a guy that you're not married to. So if he does, in fact, give way to the rookie corner, that's okay. And that's fine. On the receiver side of things, I remain convinced that Will Fuller is going to be a Green Bay Packer. And there's some scuttle and some smoke, if you will, that the Packers had an extension worked out for Will Fuller. If they had traded for him, it just didn't work out. For those of you that watched the Packer Report video earlier today with Ross Uglem and Andy Herman, they had mentioned it on there. Not a lot of talk about Will Fuller on the free agent market. We've heard about a lot of receivers. Obviously, some have signed. If you want to talk about a guy who does fit the mold for a prove it kind of deal, because he's coming off of a season where he has some injury history and he's coming off of a PED suspension, I think that would be a perfect guy to go through that. Obviously, there's some defensive linemen. Jarrell Casey would be awesome. Just adding some help in there and maybe another veteran body next to Kenny Clark and Kingsley Keke and Dean Lowry, who still may end up being a candidate to be released if they end up signing somebody. But that all remains to be seen. But I think if you take that one big swing, it's got to be on somebody that I don't think there's anybody left, if you will, that they could take a big swing on. And I don't think that there's anybody that was a free agent that was worth that kind of swing. I know that a lot of people loved like the idea of maybe Curtis Samuel or trading for Allen Robinson, which guys, that's just not going to happen. Like, let me tell you that right now. They're not trading Allen Robinson to the Packers. They might trade him because he's going to force his way out of there if he can, but they're not trading him to the Packers. And Curtis Samuel, I made the joke earlier that he should sign in Green Bay because he knows a thing or two about coming up just short. Those of you that don't get that joke, go ahead and Google Michigan, Ohio State 2016, and you'll understand the joke shortly after that. But I just don't think there was anybody out there that you were like, man, these guys are worth that kind of a swing. And more often than not, those guys aren't available. Even when the Packers made their big free agency moves a few years ago, none of those guys right away, you were like, man, that's a great signing for those big money type players. Zadarius and Preston Smith were good players that they gave great money to. Now they've been lucky that Zadarius Smith's been a great player, but that's the free agency side of things. It remains to be seen how all that is going to work. And if you guys that are in the chat, you guys have all been great. Let me know if something happens, because I'm obviously not checking Twitter and my phone and all that stuff throughout this course of time. So I can't see everything that is going on at this point. But let's move to the other thing that we're talking about here, and that is the state of the Packers offensive line. David Bakhtiari is injured. Billy Turner is going to be back. They added a couple of void years to his deal when they restructured his deal. And yes, Bernard, that is true. I don't know if anybody smart actually argues that, but otherwise I should say. But anyways, the state of the Packers offensive line is that they have their two tackles of the future, at least the immediate future, but David Bakhtiari is injured, and it remains to be seen when he's going to be back. And then you have the chess piece or the enigma. Well, enigma is not the right word, but the move, the thing that is the straw that stirs the drink for this offensive line is Elton Jenkins and where he's going to play. And let me start there because we have talked about it a little bit on this show, but what position will and or should Elton Jenkins be playing in 2021?
I mean, wow, he's clearly shown that he's able to play all 5 positions for the Packers. Uh, boy, I would really, I guess I would think, tackle. You could swing him over to right tackle if, but that's obviously if you like what you have inside, which especially now that Corey Linsley's out, you don't necessarily have a bunch of strong guys there on the inside. I know one thing that I saw that you saw, and obviously I read it and I thought it interesting. Daniel Jeremiah believes that he should be playing center, which, I mean, he could, and obviously I believe that was his natural position at Mississippi State. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that's really using all of his value of what he brings to this offense. He's clearly shown that he's able to play the right tackle, right guard, left guard. It doesn't really matter where he's playing. So I don't really know if center is really where to put him. But again, there is the talk of, they could slide Runyon in at guard. He looks to be, of how many people like to complain about the Packers draft last year, he looks to be like a steal in the 6th round, you can say. So really, I think he could play tackle if they wanted him to, but also you still want strong guards. You still want strong guys inside, because it's one thing to say, oh, well, we've got amazing tackles, and then just okay guys in the middle, because then teams are going to want to attack you from the middle, and there's so many more edge guys who can play inside. Even the Packers are trying to tap into that with Zadarius Smith of, well, we want you to play a little inside and outside. So I think they'll keep him with guard, but if they wanted to, again, it's hard for me to answer. I know I'm not fully answering this. I'm just saying what, oh, well, this could work, but this could work as well. But again, that's kind of what the player he is you can throw him kind of wherever, and he's shown you what he can do, and it's pretty good stuff at any of those positions along the offensive line for the Packers.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think that, Lambeau in here telling me that I'm going to have him stay put. Yeah, that's my stance. Leave Elton Jenkins alone. He's an all-pro left guard. And we had Owen Reese on last week. And this is kind of my point that I'm going to get to here in just a minute. And last week, Owen said, just have him do something and then stay there. And, there's no sense in weakening 2 spots to, strengthen one, so to speak. Put your good players where the good players play and then figure out the rest later. And I know that people say tackle is more valuable than guard, and I understand that to some degree, but I don't care. Like, an all-pro guard, like, is Quentin Nelson more valuable to his team than Billy Turner? The answer to that question is yes. Quentin Nelson is the best guard in all of football. Billy Turner is a really good tackle, and that certainly matters. JJ, how are we doing, my friend? Thank you for tuning in so early in the morning. But the Packers, not only that, but if you look at the left side of their offensive line when it's healthy, David Bakhtiari and Elton Jenkins gives you an elite group on that side. Leave that alone. Don't worry about the center position from that standpoint. And I know Corey Linsley's awesome, was awesome. Now he's a Los Angeles Charger. Kudos and good luck to him. But leave him alone. Let Jenkins play there. Slide Lucas Patrick over to center. That's his natural position anyways, and just let him do that. And then figure out right guard. Is that John Runyon? Is that Lane Taylor, who you could re-sign? Is that an offensive lineman that they could be signing in free agency? We didn't talk about that, but the Packers have shown some interest in offensive linemen. So I think that part remains to be seen as well. Those are things that I just think, you're talking about moving Jenkins around for what might be 4 games. Now, if Bakhtiari's out for the season or something like that, that changes things. But if Bakhtiari's out to the season, it kind of brings me back to the old quote from Tom Moore about, they asked him when Peyton Manning was the quarterback in Indianapolis, why don't you give Jim Sorgi more reps? And he said, if 18 goes down, we are bleeped, and we don't practice bleeped. So what I mean by that is if David Bakhtiari misses an entire season, and I'm talking more than, last year he ended up missing 3 games at the end of the season, they're bleeped. That's just kind of how it works when your left tackle gets hurt. More often than not, it's very similar to when your quarterback gets hurt. You don't replace guys like that. So leave Jenkins alone, figure out the rest later. And we're going to talk about how to figure out how to get all the rest figured out now. And we're going to talk some of the offensive linemen. So my first question for you, Andrew, is who is the number one offensive tackle in this class? The first guy who's going to come off the board, or in your mind, at least the first guy who should come off the board.
Oh, it's Penny Sewell. Everyone's saying any mock draft I see, the guy from Oregon is the top tackle. Played very well. Another guy, and I think the thing that really hurts this player, Rashawn Slater out of Northwestern, I think the big thing that hurts him, so to say, is he did sit out this past season, albeit it was a shortened season in the Big Ten. But that can't hurt. That can't he can't it doesn't hurt to play. So those are the two top guys. Another guy kind of up there in the mid range. I've looked at like 3 or 4 different mock drafts. Almost every one of them says this is the Chargers pick. Christian Darrisaw from Virginia Tech. He's also a strong guy. And this is a really, really good class. There's plenty of guys, from those 3 I just named to Tevin Jenkins, Alex Leatherwood, Liam Eichenberg, a lot of these guys who they say they're either NFL ready now to just plug in your line, or guys that are close to there that you can play, but they might, have some struggle areas. But there's a lot of guys that are talked very highly about in terms of, if you draft this guy, he's going to be a playmaker day one. And it's actually pretty extraordinary to kind of see how many, which really does make going to make this draft pretty interesting.
And it does. And these are guys that you mentioned, Slater and Sewell and guys like that. They're not going to be anywhere near available when the
Penny
Packers are on the
Sewell,
clock.
like 5. I think number 5 is a lot of the mocks I'm seeing, and a lot of what I'm hearing from other places, that he's going to be clear cut top 10. There's no way he's out of the top 10. And pretty much the same with Slater, is top 10, maybe just after 10.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, unless we find him with a gas mask on draft night, a picture with something like that, then that's going to be the case for him. So with that in mind, who are some guys that you think could be available towards the end of round 1 where the Packers could feasibly be picking? I know a couple of favorites. Elijah Vera Tucker is certainly one, and he just smells like a Green Bay Packer. I'm sure that's the case, that he has that tackle experience. He can play guard when that time comes as well. He can be at the end of round 1. Cosme from Texas is another one. Brady Christensen, chill, Labo. I'll get there. Brady Christensen is a name where I don't know if he's probably not going to go in round 1, but there just doesn't seem to be a lot of buzz about him. And he's somebody who I think is pretty damn good too. There's Tevin Jenkins, who I don't remember if you mentioned him just a second ago or not, but
I was waiting to mention him a little.
Jenkins to me is a guy that if he's on the board when Green Bay picks and you've exhausted your cornerback route, there's none of the corners you like are still there, pick him, plug him in at right tackle for the next decade. And I think you're in a good shape there on that side of things. So who are some guys, I just mentioned quite a few, but at the end of round 1 that you think the Packers could be addressing? And, do you think that's something they look to at the end of round 1?
Yeah. And I know you just kind of talked about Tevin Jenkins. Obviously he's really good, but I want to talk about Alex Leatherwood out of Alabama. He, really on film, you can see he's a pretty strong guy. He's not super fast and athletic. But again, that's not the end all be all. He's got strong hands, and he's really good at run blocking. That's really where he really pops out on the film, of being able to get to that second level and being able to, even just having a guy in front of him, just be able to bully him into the ground. And the big thing with him is although he's played left tackle the past 2 seasons for Alabama, and he was extremely successful at that position, but he did play right guard his sophomore season. So there's a little bit of versatility there. And on some film, I know in the Rose Bowl against Notre Dame, I believe there was a goal line situation where they just flat out stuck him on the right side, kind of as an extra tackle over there as a power formation. And the play didn't necessarily go right behind him, but went to that right side. But he's a bully. He's got pretty good footwork in pass pro. He can get beat a little bit by, especially with some guys with a little more finesse, guys who are able to change direction rather quickly, which you're going to see in the NFL, obviously. But there's a lot to like about him. He plays at, the highest level of college football, and he doesn't give up many QB hurries at that. So he's a guy who I'm seeing in a lot of areas, late rounds. The one I'm actually looking at right now, I believe CBS Sports, they have him at 25, but I've seen a lot where he's there while the Packers are picking. And I think it's a real option of them going for a tackle position in the first round. Like you said, if they exhaust all opportunities of trying to get one of those corners, say Greg Newsome, J.C. Horn, the one out of Georgia, no, Stokes. I almost forgot. Yeah. So I do really think that it is a very good possibility that they take a tackle in the first round. And even if they don't, there's still some really good ones. So I'm excited to see kind of what they want to do here, because they're going to pick one. They're going to pick someone as tackle. Another one, even in the second round, Jackson Carman from Clemson. Pretty similar, not the greatest footwork sometimes, but again, still fairly strong dude. Played for Clemson. He was protecting Trevor Lawrence's blind spot his entire career for Clemson. So that speaks for itself too, and that's another guy who could very well be their second round. So again, there's a ton of guys who, I would be thrilled to hear the Packers pick, because even if, people are like, oh, this person's going to be a piece of work. Well, the Packers know a thing or two about drafting pieces of work along the offensive line that have panned out. So
yeah, I think that there's a lot of guys, like you mentioned, especially towards the end of round one, to where it's very possible that could be the BPA when that time hits. But I do have to say this. You mentioned starting day 2, and JJ just brought him up. And if I don't mention him, I'm not going to have a partner next week. And that is Dylan Radins out of North Dakota State. Obviously, with Jake Morley, I'm friends with Ross Uglum. Those guys cover North Dakota State. Ross Uglum for a living, obviously. I get a lot of insight on the North Dakota Staters, the Bison, which is how you say it. It's Bison, not Bison. The same reason it's Visor, not Visor. So I also say that because Ross might be watching, and I think he'll appreciate that. But Radins is a guy at the Senior Bowl. He played all over the offensive line. He played left tackle. He played right tackle. And I think the Packers, something you can tell about their offensive linemen, they have a type, right? They value that versatility. Josh Sitton, TJ Lang, all those dudes, even back in those days, were blindside protectors, or at least at minimum have some kind of tackle experience. And I think that's something the Packers are going to really value, especially on that day 2, day 3 side of things. I think if you had to ask me to bet, and we'll get to that a little bit more towards the end of the show here, but if you had to ask me, that I think the Packers were going to address the offensive line, I think it's likely going to be on not day 1 as opposed to days 2 or even day 3. But I do think they pick 1 or 2 guys, but we'll get to that here in just a minute. I mentioned Jake Morley's favorite team, so now I'm going to mention mine, and that is the Michigan Wolverines. And they have a gentleman that went there by the name of Jalen Mayfield. And I wanted to see what your thoughts were on him. I know he was somebody who's been linked to the Packers. The Packers typically do like those high-end programs. That Big Ten pedigree certainly comes from there. That's one of the reasons they were interested in Rashawn Gary. They like guys that have played in the cold weather. I think that's part of it as well. But what are your thoughts? Mayfield last year didn't play a bunch. He had some injury issues. He's only started a handful of games. I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but it's not a lot. But what are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought it up, because I failed to mention him. But again, there's so many names that it's hard to try and cram them all together. But I really like him, and I actually just got done watching a little bit more of his film from this year. Obviously, he played the first 2 games for Michigan, and then he wound up. I think he just wound up saying, "I'm done. I'm out. I'm going to focus on the draft."
He got injured. He didn't do that. Yeah,
he got okay.
Yeah, he was injured.
That's right.
Michigan.
That's right.
The only opt-outs that Michigan had were Ambry Thomas and Nico Collins.
Okay, then that's right. Yeah, so that's my bad. But Again, I another guy I really like. He's another one. He is very quick to the second level. He has great vision in the run game of recognizing um, who to target. Uh, you know, on his blocks. Another one, pretty good hands. Pass pro, he's can be a little iffy, but again, he's played all over. He's played a lot of right tackle, which is good. There's not a whole lot of the top guys who were strictly right tackle, and that was pretty much what he was this season and last season, if I'm not mistaken. But again, he's played around. Um, but yeah, again, I think I do. I really like him. I did. I went back and watched a little bit more film because I think he was one of the first guys I looked at for one of my articles. I think it was my second week. I think he was one immediately after Leatherwood. But yeah, I've liked what I've seen from him so far. But again, it's the pass pro that's it would need a little work. But again, he's young too, and I think that's the big thing. I think he's only 21. So and a lot of these other guys like Leatherwood's 23 going on 24. So.
And the Packers typically like those guys to be a little bit younger. I mean, that's not to say they won't draft someone who's older, but if you look at some of their picks, Kenny Clark is like the poster child Packers first round pick, right? He was young, played a position of need, played a position that's a little more premier, rushes the passer, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. Lambo Labo pointing out here just some of the dudes he's had to block as well.
Yeah,
Chase Young, Gross
exactly.
Matos, Jason Owe, Shakatoni, Julian Okwara, excuse me. And there are other guys too. Ohio State has a top 10 pass rusher, it seems like every year in the freaking draft. Michigan plays Ohio State every season. Actually, let me rephrase that. Michigan has the honor of losing to Ohio State on the Saturday after Thanksgiving, which is the week before Wisconsin has the honor of losing to them in the Big Ten championship game. So those are some of the guys we like early. We talked about some of the guys we like later. The last question I want to ask you, Andrew, and it's the question I ask every week. The draft, I ascribe to the theory that the draft is 5 rounds long, which means the 6th and the 7th round, it's really just preferred undrafted free agents you want to make sure you get. Anything you get out of those guys is a bonus at this point. What do you think the likelihood is on a scale of 1 to 100% that the Packers take a tackle in the first 5 rounds this year?
100. I'll
Wow.
say.
Okay.
I think they do. Day one, I'd say 50%, but again, if they're able to get one of those corners, I think they do it because after those corners that are projected in the first round, Newsome, Horn, Stokes, etc. After those guys, it's a drop off, and we know that's a position of need. And I think the best thing they can do for Jair is get him a corner alongside of him, because if you have someone who's not good or as good as your number 2, well, then obviously the teams are going to target that, and then they don't have to throw Jair's way. And so I think that's how they maximize their defensive playmakers' ability. I say day 2 is more likely for a tackle for these guys. Like, I don't know if Mayfield will be there. Maybe he will. He's another one kind of getting that late first, potential early second buzz. I think Liam Eichenberg is kind of around there too with Notre Dame, more of a day 2, but not late day 2. But again, the Packers, if they, maybe they want to trade up, maybe they want to trade up in the second round or something, and get one of those guys. But Jackson Carman, I know I said he looks like he could be one that could be there for the Packers in the second if they stick with where they are in the draft order. But again, I find it very likely that they draft one. I don't see why they wouldn't in my book.
Sure. Okay. Actually, I said that was my answer is 100% as well. They picked an offensive lineman like every year since Ted Thompson was his first year in charge. So that's not uncommon. I think they pick a guy. I think they groom him. Maybe he's the right tackle of the future. Maybe he's just another one of those versatile chess pieces along the offensive line, which seems like they really value. If you look at under Matt LaFleur and Adam Stenavich, I think the ideal offensive lineman is someone like Elton or someone like Billy Turner, guys that can play all over the place, and someone gets injured. And let's be honest, guys, offensive lineman, that's rarely a position where you get the same guys to play all 16. So you need, 17 in next year's case, but you need depth at those positions. So I think you'll do that. The question we had from Dan Edwards was dream pick you wish the Packers drafted in the first round this year, regardless of position. So just the first round, doesn't have to be an offensive tackle. I think that was the point of that question. So let's go from there. Who are your people or who is your person? I guess you got to pick one. So don't
Yep.
give me some hedged bet answer. Pick one guy.
Greg Newsome, especially if they're staying at 29.
Gotcha. Okay. So Greg Newsome, the cornerback out of Northwestern. I'm going to take JC Horn, the cornerback out of South Carolina. I think that he's a phenomenal fit. I think he's going to do the things that they need him to do. I love Newsome as well. You know, I've tagged the phrase Newsome Molden 2021. So Elijah Molden being the other guy, obviously the slot corner in round 2. If they do that, then I don't even have to watch the rest of the draft. I don't really, at that point, who cares? But yeah, I think it's a cornerback. I think a lot of us are going to be wishing for that. Unlike last year, where everybody wanted a receiver or Patrick Queen, basically. I think that what you're going to find is that people basically aren't, the Packers can almost go a wide variety of ways, and people aren't going to be upset unless it's a quarterback or a running back, which I think running back went out the window when they signed Aaron Jones last week, but could have surprised us before. So that remains to be seen on that side of things. But we're out of time for tonight. Be sure to check those guys out. Andrew, your articles come out when?
Tuesdays, 9 a.m. They're published roughly around noon. You'll catch them out on Twitter and Facebook.
And you'll be smarter for having watched all that. You can follow me on Twitter. I am at Jacob Westendorf. And our show, our friend, my partner, Jake Morley, will be back next week to talk defensive tackles with the great and incomparable Ben Fennell. Will be here to talk defensive linemen with us next week, another position of need for the Packers. And tomorrow on Game On Wisconsin, be sure to check out Open Book, hosted by Eli Berkovitz, Zach Jacobson, and Jen Mackey. Will be with Packers tight end Dominique Daphne, who's got a great story. There's a lot of really cool stuff that comes out of his side of things. So I think it's awesome. That'll be a great thing. You don't want to miss that. In the meantime, like you see on the bottom line here, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at GameOnWI, Instagram at GameOnWI, and subscribe to us on YouTube. As I've mentioned, and as you guys may have seen, Periscope is going away very soon. So the way you're going to check our shows, you're going to need to subscribe to us on YouTube. That's going to be the easiest way to find us all off season and going into the regular season long. Tell your friends. We appreciate your guys' support that you've done all season long for us and now into the off season. We're about 1 month away from the NFL draft, so it's getting closer slowly but surely. Thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next week.